from the Frontier Wrestling Alliance headquarters in London, this is FWA Radio with Dave Bradshaw.
Hello there and welcome along to the first episode of FWA Radio with me, Dave Bradshaw. And every week from now on I'm going to be bringing you exclusive interviews with some of the biggest names in the wrestling world, plus the latest news and happenings from the FWA and of course industry news from around the globe. Now, this is a show that we want to be all about you, the fans. It's your show, you own it. So take out a pen and paper. I'm going to give you an email address, which is one we hope you will come to use regularly if you want to get anything off your chest about what's going on in wrestling, or indeed if you have any questions for any of our upcoming guests. So that email address is radio@fwauk.com. That's radio@fwauk.com. And in fact, I'll be telling you at the end of today's show about some of the guests we've got coming up in the next few weeks, so you can be thinking about some of the questions you might want to ask them. Now, as for today's show, in a moment I'm going to be bringing you the first of a two-part interview I recently conducted with Alex Shane, who is, of course, one of the most successful and controversial figures in the recent history of British wrestling. Alex will be talking to me about his role in the new FWA and responding to some of his more vocal critics who have been talking about his role in the company. But before we go there, let's have a roundup of this week's news. Jane has that for us.
The FWA has announced its first monthly fan slam, starting at 2 p.m. on the afternoon of New Frontiers. That's Sunday, 2nd of August, in Broxbourne Civic Hall. The event, for which tickets will cost £4 on the door, features a wrestler Q&A session, video game tournaments, and an early chance to buy FWA merchandise. It will also include the first FWA Unsigned show, a special 4-match card featuring some of the hottest free agents currently in the UK. 2 of those bouts have already been announced. Dave Rain and Sam Bailey take on Lethal Dose in a guest tag match from Future Shock Wrestling, while the model Danny Hope goes one-on-one with Matt Taylor. This past weekend was a busy one for British wrestling. Ahead of their big match at New Frontiers next month, the leaders of the new school retained their IPW UK British Tag Team Championships by disqualification against the Thrillers in an exciting main event at the company's Summer Sizzler event in Sittingbourne. The two teams will settle their differences in a TLC match at IPW's September show in the same venue. Meanwhile, the fate of Johnny Fear became clearer at XWA's Vendetta in Morecambe, when owner Greg Lambert announced he will be reinstated into the company if he can beat CJ Banks and Damon Lee in a handicap match this September. In news from across the pond, WWE superstar Edge suffered a torn Achilles tendon this weekend, which will sideline him for the rest of the year. The injury happened during a match against Jeff Hardy when Edge attempted a leapfrog from the corner of the ring. Edge's tag team title defence with Chris Jericho against Legacy at the 26th of July Night of Champions will now have to be changed. The main events for that pay-per-view were confirmed this week. Randy Orton will defend the WWE title against John Cena and Triple H, with Jeff Hardy getting a rematch against CM Punk for the World Heavyweight Championship. Speaking of Jeff Hardy, his contract expires in a few weeks and he is yet to re-sign with WWE. The 31-year-old former WWE champion gave an interview this past week suggesting he didn't want to commit to a new long-term contract, causing many insiders to assume that he is planning an extended leave of absence. WWE officials are reportedly trying to get him to stay with the company until after SummerSlam in August. In Mexico, popular minis wrestlers La Parquita and El Espectrito II have been found dead in a hotel room after allegedly bringing back 2 prostitutes. The police believe that the 2 women spiked the wrestlers' drinks in order to rob them, and that the dosage was high enough to kill both men. Perhaps due to the bizarre nature of the story, it has gained mainstream news coverage around the world. Japanese news now, where wrestling legend Mitsuhara Misara's funeral on Saturday drew 26,000 mourners, making it among the biggest sports funerals in history. The queue to pay respects was reportedly over 3 miles long. Misara died during a wrestling match on the 13th of June in Hiroshima. Walter Sieber, better known as Waldo Von Erich, died suddenly in Canada this weekend. He was 75. Sieber was the storyline brother of the Von Erich family patriarch Fritz in the 1950s and 60s, and was also a regular opponent of Bruno Sammartino in the old WWF. Meanwhile, another part of the Von Erich legacy, the famous Reunion Arena in Dallas, is due to be demolished in the next few weeks. Finally, bad news for a couple of WWE legends this week. Roddy Piper was arrested for drunk driving in Los Angeles this past weekend and was later released on bail. And Gerald Briscoe is due for surgery this week after suffering multiple strokes a few weeks ago. Everyone here at FWA wishes him well.
All right, thanks, Jane. Now, before we go into this week's interview, just one more time, I want to remind you of that email address, because if there's anything you've heard on the news you just heard, or indeed any feedback you want to give us about the show, that email address, one more time, radio@fwauk.com. In fact, we're also looking for someone who wants to give us their opinions in person. If you're the kind of person who feels like you really need to get up on your soapbox and have a good rant about something, we're starting a new feature. It's going to be called the Shooting Gallery. And if you'd like to give us your opinions in person on the show, same email address, radio@fwauk.com. Anyway, without further ado, let's move on to this week's interview. Alex Shane is one of the names that is synonymous not only with the FWA, but with British wrestling as a whole over the past few years. He's also a hugely successful promoter, trainer, radio presenter and author. But he's one of the most controversial figures in the industry, not least because of his involvement with the rebirth of the FWA. Alex is with us now. Hello, Alex.
Hi, Dave. How you doing?
Good, thank you. Now, we've got a lot to get through with regard to the new FWA and your role in it, including, of course, the first show, New Frontiers, which is coming up in Broxbourne on the 2nd of August. But first I want to talk about the old FWA. Now, you were well known, as I've just said, as one of the main players in that company on both sides of the camera. What do you think is the old FWA's place in wrestling history?
I think the FWA is sort of the British equivalent of ECW. Because the ECW had a massive influence on me in terms of when I sort of took over the FWA. At that point, it was run by Mark Sloan, then Elazar Cabrera as well, and I started running the London shows of Elazar. And we got into a situation where we ended up having York Hall booked for a show. An outside promoter had booked York Hall, and the thing was like our biggest crowd was like 300 people. What are we going to do with those? With a massive building that holds 1,200 people. So I put the suggestion forward. I've got an idea for a show and how to make this work. And ECW's folded. There's a couple of guys who are quite fresh from ECW that have still got a bit of name value. Balls Mahoney could do a hardcore match. Jerry Lynn can do your chain wrestling sort of match, your 5-star classic. And then let's get somebody new. And that new person who was like untested at that time was AJ Styles. So ECW directly influenced what FWA did, and it was almost like a wave effect. The ECW wave hit America, and then we got a kickback from that. And what I was catering towards were the people who were ECW fans in this country who liked, because there's a massive difference between WWE fans and wrestling fans, and it's a difference that it's come back and bit me in the arse a few times. But at that point in time, I thought that's what we were catering towards. So I think what the old FWA did was my intention was to bring the best wrestling I possibly could to England, and not only did that inspire a whole batch of fans who weren't going to British wrestling shows to come and see us, but it's also inspired literally thousands of people to either train to be a wrestler, to get involved in the business. So I think it was responsible for a massive rebirth, the FWA, along with the revival show of British wrestling. And I think in some ways it's made the business, it's definitely made it more of an industry than it was, because there was only a couple of promoters running shows at that point. Whether it's made it better as a whole, it is debatable, but it's had a massive impact on, I would say, the one thing, it's massively upped the quality of actual wrestling that takes place in England. That's not to say that there isn't more bad wrestling here now, but there's definitely, the good wrestling is much, much better on mass than it was before, I think.
Now, it's interesting, some of the things you've just said there. I do want to move on to where those, that legacy, where that fits into the new FWA in a minute, if I can. But before we go there, I'm hoping to get some kind of picture of how you came to be involved in the new FWA. And to do that, I want to talk about the year you've had, because it's certainly been eventful. Now, let's rewind to last October, if we can. You decided to come back to British wrestling, supposedly for one final match in IPW UK against Martin Stone. Can you tell us how that came about?
Well, doing one final match, because I never really retired. The idea was for me to drop the belt to Haid, which was one of my students, with Katie Lee turning on me, and that was a real good thing for me. I got Katie from Hammerlock, and I got a fan gave me crap on the internet once for saying Katie instead of Kat, but Kat is obviously what I know her as, and I don't call her Katie, but to people listening in, they might be more familiar with her as Katie, because she's Katie Lee. And Haid, so for me, Haid was one of my students as well, so that was a real big achievement for me. It was a sort of crowning achievement that I wasn't booking the company at the time, but the person who was considered worthy of taking the belt from me was Haid. So I needed to take a step away, freshen myself up, and I was going to come back as a babyface and chase Haid for the belt.